Steven, and I am at the fear. In grief and loss, I scour the dark recesses of my mind. My daughter, visiting family. On my phone, a missed call and a frantic message. Something happened to Darby. We're taking her to the ER. No follow-up message. Those few moments it took to reach someone stretched eternal. Every part of me imploring, is my daughter okay? As fear flooded my brain, which began to split as I drowned in the sea of recognition. I can't live without my child. She was okay, but to this day, I vividly recall that agonizing fear. Many years later, that fear destroyed me when my son Sammy suddenly and unexpectedly died a month before his 13th birthday. So much in the wake of the death of my boy, I've questioned, how can I live without my child? For me, my ability to muster the strength to survive grief has in part been about conquering my fears, though I've often questioned, is there anything left to truly fear after the death of your child? We made a mistake. We gave your son too many fluids. The doctor said they didn't realize how weak Sammy's heart was. My son was in the ER with the beginnings of pneumonia when the doctor told us this. Sammy seized shortly after. The color drained from him. I watched on the monitor as his heart rate plummeted and whispered to his mother, "They're gonna code him." I knew. I worked as a critical care tech in the ICU. A haze invaded the outside edges of my vision as they wheeled the code cart outside the door. I rushed to countless codes throughout the hospital with the ICU's code cart. I can't recall how many people I've performed chest compressions on, and now, gripped by fear, I witnessed a colleague, tears in his eyes as he compressed Sammy's chest. Reality crawled, and I felt outside myself as a respiratory therapist I'd been in past codes with requested my assistance. I was working when his mother brought him in, still in my scrubs. The therapist didn't know this was my boy, my baby. They brought Sammy back twice. He barely survived the night and was transferred to a pediatric ICU in New York City, where he struggled and fought for his life, but died 19 days later. I still hear him screaming, his final breaths as his mother and I cuddled either side of our baby in the hospital bed. So much fear, agony, and feeling I can't live without my son. I belong to the bereaved now. My mind has split a lot in grief and loss. These dissociative episodes in which my mind stops processing and deciphering the outside world. And there's the constant agony of longing for my child. Boundaries are vital. Setting aside time to de-stress, process my grief, and connect with Sammy and nature through trail running, hiking and kayaking like Sammy and I used to do together. So many adventures, so much love. So much about my grief journey has been about getting stronger, more resilient, and part of that has been accomplished by choosing to step outside my comfort zone, by facing and pushing through fears as I recreate myself and build a life around grief. This chapter of my grief journey began with a spontaneous cross-country road trip, roughly 3 months of testing my independence and self-reliance, of engaging in meaningful experiences to wrap around grief and loss. I slept in rest stops, dead-end roads and in abandoned structures, though mostly I slept under the stars, deep in the forest and mountains. I spent my first night at the Saratoga Homestead in upstate New York, a long abandoned facility that opened in 1914 to treat tuberculosis patients. Roughly 1,000 people died in the building rumored to be haunted and featured on the Travel Channel's Destination Fear. I didn't encounter any ghosts, but I was terrified. In Ohio, I set up camp at the Moonville train tunnel, one of the few remnants of a ghost town that once housed miners and railroad workers. As the light surrendered to the darkness, I anxiously awaited the lanterns of the ghosts of railroad workers struck down by a train. But my only visitor was my own fear. Mostly on my trip, I set up my tent in the forest, in the mountains, on ocean shores, as I explored places like Utah, Nevada, Oregon, and California, pushing myself through fear as I tented in unfamiliar grizzly bear country in Wyoming, Montana, and northern Idaho. More than once I came across a hunter who said I was crazy to be out there on my own without a firearm. I found that odd. Plenty of people solo hike, and I felt safe with my bear spray pushing through the mountains and singing to Sammy to connect with my boy, and also to help avoid surprising any bears that might be in the area. But I'm not going to lie, I was terrified at first alone in my tent at night. And I was especially afraid one night when I heard what I was sure was a grizzly bear exploring outside my tent one night in Wyoming. I'd taken the proper precautions, yet I was certain I'd become extra calories for hibernation. Though given my fear and the amplification of sound in the forest at night, it was probably a field mouse. Sammy and I loved hitting the trails together. I miss exploring the wilderness and mountains with my boy. This road trip afforded ample opportunity to connect with my boy and face a fear of heights I didn't know resided within me until stepping foot on some of the dizzying ridges and mountain ledges out west. I felt Sammy so much that day on Mount Bora, Idaho's tallest peak with its infamous Chicken Out Ridge, a stretch that has turned back many hikers and jacked up my heart rate and breathing as I looked down while climbing hand over foot. But this was about getting stronger to better equip myself to live with grief and loss, so I forced myself to continue. Mount Bora was my first introduction to mountain goats. It was also where I lost my grip on a section that required hand-over-foot climbing. I wouldn't have survived the fall, but in that moment before I caught myself, I felt no fear, but a quiet calm and Sammy all around me as I whispered my boy's name. I didn't even notice I'd cut my knee open until I glanced down and saw the blood. I don't know what to think in hindsight. Had I welcomed death in the agony of grieving? Or had I felt Sammy blanketing me in his love, keeping me safe? I shared the experience with family members. I freaked out some. I get it. I just know that grief is an individual journey. On the path I chose, I was processing my grief, engaging in meaningful experiences, creating joy around grief as I faced and pushed through fear. I was recreating myself and constructing a me that could better carry my grief over the death of my child. I sometimes question whether I was chasing a high in a desperate attempt to feel anything other than the agonizing pain of grief and loss in the wake of the death of Sammy. Maybe. But I feel stronger, more resilient. The ability to sit in and push through discomfort is key to tapping into greater resilience so you can be better equipped to survive trauma and tragedy and thrive thereafter. Fear, by definition, is an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain, or a threat. Fear typically falls into 5 general categories. Fears related to animals, such as spiders and dogs. Fears related to the natural environment, such as heights, thunder, and darkness. Fears related to blood, injury, or medical issues. Fears related to specific situations, such as flying, and other fears, like choking, loud noises, and drowning. Fears are persistent. They can be unrealistic and are often intense. I've been bitten 3 times by 3 different dogs. Once as a toddler in the head, which required stitches and left a scar. I loved dogs and had them as pets growing up, but I'm also terrified of unfamiliar ones, which they sense, causing them to peg me a threat, which adds fuel to the blazing fear burning inside me. I also have a reoccurring dream in which sharks nearly eat me in various, often strange settings. I plan to overcome that fear in the near future by swimming deep in the ocean. I was too frightened to do it on my road trip when the opportunity presented itself. A fear I continue to face and push through often in my grief is vulnerability. Choosing to express myself when I need while grieving, sadness, anger, joy, and share my journey for me and to help others by normalizing grief discussions and journeys, despite the judgment and sometimes punishment of others. I share the successes and failures, my strengths and weaknesses, the ugly, like my continued battle with binge eating, and the beautiful, so many moments with my son Sammy, kayaking, hiking, and so much cuddling. Psychologists tout the benefits of overcoming your fears to increase confidence and boost your chances of achieving your goals through the ability to push through obstacles, to create new opportunities and an improved version of yourself, as well as reduce the amount of the stress hormone cortisol released in fearful situations. Overcoming fears makes you stronger emotionally and mentally and helps you gain a sense of empowerment and freedom by expanding your comfort zone. You're able to better regulate your emotions, learn what you're capable of, and become more resilient. Every day I live with the grief of losing my child, I become more resilient. It's an unnatural, agonizing reality that nothing prepares you for. My choices since my son Sammy died, when I've soared and when I've sank, have helped me transform myself into a version of me I can live with, one that is better able to carry grief and loss, build a life and create joy around grief, pinpoint and put energy into what really matters to me. It's a work in progress, always will be, and facing and pushing through fears has been integral on this grief journey. I still question how I can live in grief and loss, even as I'm living it. My son Sammy was fearless in life, bold, brave, so damn beautiful. I continue to love and miss him more with each passing day. My beautiful boy, my son, Sammy. Beautiful. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Thanks for coming along. Peace.